Today I need to nut and bolt my car, so I'm going to show you guys how to do that. Also, I have to clean up the shop really quick first, so I'm going to do that before because I really hate working in a dirty shop. And I have a package. These are my motor mounts. They're just like knockoff Nismo mounts. I'm slowly turning the car back into a more comfortable street car. So these are going to get installed in another video, so stay tuned for that. So like I said, I'm just going to be nut and bolting the car and cleaning up the shop because it's a mess, so let's go see how bad it is. This is the current state of the shop. We got all kinds of stuff there. We've got stuff all in the way over here. So I want to straighten everything up so that I have space to work because I really hate working whenever the shop is messy and cluttered. So I'm going to do that first. The shop is passably clean at this point. It's not great, but now I can at least find things without being annoyed, and I can also work without getting completely covered in schmoo. So what I want to do is take a look at the S13. I haven't really gotten underneath it. I did clean it up a little bit, but I didn't really do anything since I drove it last except for fix the fuel pump. So I want to nut and bolt all of the suspension, make sure nothing came loose, make sure nothing is worn, like tie rods, axle boots, that kind of thing. Just kind of basically go over the car and do a post-event style check. This is the same thing you would do before you drive an event. I just do it before and after because I really want to drive the car on the street more. So I'm going to take you guys through a quick nut and bolt of your drip car. So I'm starting at the front of the car. The first two things I noticed are I have 2 leaks underneath the car. One is power steering, which I've known about, but it's getting to a point where I really need to replace the rack, so I'm gonna need to order one of those pretty soon. And the other one is an oil leak on the opposite side of the engine. I am going to basically go over and put a wrench on everything, spacer, brakes, coilover, all of the suspension arms, and just make sure that everything's good. So what I do is I just grab a big pile of all the things that I'm gonna need for this, and you don't need to torque everything down. You're just checking to make sure it's still tight. So if you find something that's not tight, that's when you would go in and maybe find the torque specs and fix it. But right now I just want to put a wrench on everything and make sure that it's good. So I'm gonna start with the brakes, make sure those are still tight, which they are. Now I didn't get to drive this car super hard last time I drove it, so I'm expecting to not find very much, but that doesn't mean I shouldn't be as thorough as I usually would. This is the brake caliper bracket, checking the bottom and the top of that, kind of doing this blind, but you just want to make sure it's not super loose. All right, so now I want to check the coilover to the knuckle. And unfortunately mine has a really shitty bolt on one side. I also have all of these paint marked, which really helps because you can kind of look at it when you're at the track to be able to tell if something is loose or not. I highly recommend still putting a wrench on it after you drive because you never know. It's more of like something that you can check really fast at the track, but you don't want to rely solely on that. So next I want to check the tie rod. I'm checking to see if this is loose, if the alignment has changed, as in if the adjuster is loose, and also if there's any play on the inner or outer tie rod, because if so, I need to go ahead and replace those. So I just use an adjustable for this because it's the easiest. The paint marks are in the right spot, so that's a good sign. My rack is trashed. So the adjustment itself looks good. And then the castle bolts, if you have the pin in the castle bolt, it's gonna make this a little bit harder. You're gonna have to pull it out. I do not, because I am a person that likes to live life on the edge. But then you're gonna wanna check the lower control arm as well and make sure that one is still tight. Again, I'm doing this blind, so it's kind of a trick for me. And then you obviously want to check your coilover adjustment rings as well and make sure those aren't loose, haven't moved. So you want to check the tension rod adjustment, make sure it's still tight, which it is. Check the bolts themselves, which is, yeah, they're 17s. Still good. And then you want to check where the tension rod bracket bolts up to the chassis. There are two bolts. One of them is right here, and the other one is in here a little ways. I think they're both 17s, maybe they're 14s. Can't remember. Oh, those are definitely 14s. But you just want to check those because they come loose really, really often on S14s, S13s. And it can cause some serious issues if this comes loose or comes off even. I've seen that happen. So if you're not running a sway bar in the front, which is pretty common, I'm not running a sway bar in the front, these come loose even more. So you just want to double check and make sure those are still tight, which mine are. So everything on the front here looks pretty good aside from those two leaks that I need to hunt down. Another thing you want to make sure you check, which I think you should check it a lot more often than just when you're not bolting your car, but anytime you take your wheels off or anytime you notice an issue with your front alignment or any kind of clunking, you want to check your front spacers. Now, people have differing opinions about whether or not you should use a bolt-on spacer like this, but it has been fine for me. It's fine for so many people. Just check them and make sure they're tight enough. I also recommend replacing the lugs that it comes with nicer ones so they don't strip out because that can be a pain in the butt. But just double check, make sure it's tight. Another thing you're really going to want to take a look at with S13s and S14s is to make sure there's no damage to the body harness itself. You want to make sure that there's no rubbing going on. I don't really have this issue because I have a small wheeled car. But if you're running bigger wheels or tighter fitment, you really want to make sure that this isn't getting any kind of rubbage. So I moved to the back of the car. I'm pretty much going to repeat that process. I don't have a spacer on the rear to worry about. I'm going to check the brakes. I'm going to check the coilover. I'm going to check all of the suspension arms, make sure those are good. And then I'm also going to check the rear sway bar, the rear subframe nuts, which my subframe bushings will probably be a video in the near future because those are disgusting. And then I'm going to get underneath the car. I don't think I'm going to be able to film that. I'll try. But get underneath the car and check all the drivetrain stuff. So first up, I like to start with the brakes because they're easy. There we go. Trying not to get my head in the way, but I'm not really used to working on my car while filming, so this is definitely a bit of a learning curve for me. Those are tight. I want to check the coilover at the bottom where it mounts to the knuckle. And then, like I said, you're going to go through all of these suspension arms. I think all of these bolts on an S13 are 19s, but I obviously could be wrong, especially if you have mismatched hardware like I usually do. Pro tip, don't have mismatched hardware. It is so much faster to work on your car when all of the hardware is the same damn size. So, now I am going inside on the rear upper control arm, checking that, and then the inside of the tie rod where both of those bolt to the subframe. I don't know if you're going to be able to see it because it's kind of in there. Plus, I'm going to be in the way because that's how I do. So like like I said, I wasn't really able to drive the crap out of the car last time, so I'm not finding anything that's loose. The last 2 times I've driven it have been on wet tracks, so it's really not taking a whole lot of abuse right now, but I still want to check and make sure because you never know. All right, so now I want to check the subframe. Alright, so that one's good. I'm just going to check the other 4. So as anticipated, this isn't exactly the easiest thing for me to do and film at the same time, so I'm kind of just going to walk you through it. The first thing I'm going to check, I'm going to start up at the drive shaft. I'm going to check all of the bolts there. Then I'm going to move to the carrier bearing, and I'm going to check the carrier bearing bolts, make sure those are both still good. And then I'm going to come to the back, and I'm going to check the bolts where the drive shaft bolts to the diff. And then I'm going to check all of the diff bolts. There are 2 here. And then I think there are 2 more in the case, in the front cover. So I'm going to check those. And then I'm going to check all of my axle bolts, make sure all of those are still good. It actually looks like I need to replace some axle boots. So I'm going to put that on my to-do list. But yeah, that's kind of all I'm going to do under here. I am also going to check the hardware for the exhaust, because it gets hot and these bolts can come loose because they are getting heat cycled. So I just want to check and make sure none of my exhaust is coming loose. It's a little bit haggard as it is, so I don't want it to get any worse. So yeah, that's kind of all I need to do under here, and then I will go to the other side and copy everything. When you nut and bolt your car, obviously your wheels come off. This is a great time to take stock of your tires. These are my front tires, these are my rear tires. My front tire is pretty much brand new. I think I put it on before the last event, so aside from being incredibly muddy because our yard has been a mud pit lately, this looks great. Doesn't have any weird wear, there's no cuts, there's no issues. Looks good. My rear tire is almost to the wear bars on the inside, and then on the outside I've got a pretty good amount of life left, so I would probably flip these before I put them back on. But this also tells me that I'm probably going to need to mount tires. Alright, my camera died, but what I was saying is I'm probably going to need to mount tires at or before my next event. I do have a spare pair that I've been carrying around to events, but I've been driving a lot of wet events, so I haven't needed them. But I will probably need them a couple sessions in. I've got a low-powered car, it's just a stock KA car, so I can still get a pretty good amount of life out of these. Not a ton of things to check up here. One thing you're going to want to look at is these bolts right here that bolt the coilover to the strut tower. I also check these nuts right here because I've had them come loose depending on the track, how rough it is. And then you also want to check your motor mount bolts down there. I'm actually going to change these out pretty soon because I just got the new ones. So I'm not going to check them right now because they are going to be replaced. And then other than that, you really just want to look for anything that looks weird. Any leaks, anything that's come loose. So the last thing you want to check is stuff in the cabin. These are things that you probably would notice while you were driving, but you just want to go ahead and double check everything while you're doing it to make sure like the seat hasn't come loose. So kind of give it a shake, make sure the bracket itself hasn't come loose, lost any bolts. Make sure that your harnesses are still in good shape. I need to check my harness bar, but I have to get in the back to do that, and I'm not doing that right now. But check your harness bar, make sure it's not loose, it hasn't moved. The car is good to drive on the street. Everything looks tight, everything's safe, everything's paint marked. Hope this was really helpful for you guys, and if it wasn't, I'm sorry. But I know there are a lot of people that don't necessarily know that you need to nut and bolt your car, or how to nut and bolt your car, or how thorough you should be. It's a really, really simple thing. It shouldn't take more than 15-20 minutes. You'll get faster at it as you do it more, but you definitely should do it before and after every event, especially if you drive it in between. So I hope this was helpful. I'm going to leave a checklist down below. It was made by Spirit JP so that you can run through all of the things that you should check on your car before and after every event. They might have covered something on that checklist that I missed, so go check that out. big thanks to them for even making that. They make a lot of resources for drivers, so if you're just starting out, they're a great resource. And I hope you guys enjoyed this video, and have a good one. Don't forget to nut and bolt your car.